Hey, you are listening to a special edition of the Dealership Fix It podcast. This one's a throwback, but it's packed with real, actionable insights that still matter today. We're revisiting this conversation from 2022 with leadership and communication expert Kurt von Ahnen, who sat down with us during a pretty chaotic time in the world. I hope you all remember. But what he shared, it is timeless. So in this episode, you'll hear how the Powersports and motorcycle dealerships can lead better through uncertainty and build culture that actually communicates, but more importantly, how to spot and fix those gaps that keep your team from performing. It's one of our most replayed episodes, and for good reason. So whether you're a GM, a service manager, or just someone who gives a damn about doing it right at your dealership, there's something here for you. Let's get into it.
Does leadership, are they having conversations with everybody in there? Are they gathering them all together to have these great conversations and say, hey, just so you know, here's what we're doing. Social distancing, right? That's in the general sort of, terminology. But if a customer walks in and they're totally not on the same page, how does your staff react? I'll give you an example. I went and bought from Ace Hardware in town over here. I needed a wheelbarrow because I got this gravel and I'm doing some stuff outside. And this is what I'm doing when I'm not teaching my kids from home and actually doing work during the daytime, so the evening hours as we start to go into the later day, that's what I'm doing. So I went and bought myself a wheelbarrow. I hadn't had one in years. And I walk into this Ace Hardware and this retired guy comes trucking up. How can I help you, sir? And he walks right up. I mean, the guy's like a foot and a half from me. I'm immediately thinking like, well, I'm not uncomfortable because to me, it's like, if I'm not wearing a mask, he's not wearing a mask. He walks right up next to me. I took kind of a little bit of a sidestep and leaned on one of the shelves to be like, hey, I'm looking for a wheelbarrow and some whatever, but I immediately thought, wow, okay. So this guy, just if I were a sensitive person and I saw people walking out with masks on, so either they're sensitive or they're sensitive, in their idea of what they think they could put on someone else, right? But I started thinking, wow, there's all this perception that we're in this big soup of random mixture of perceptions. Is a leader training their staff on how to react to somebody who doesn't kind of play ball? You don't want to be like, hey, mister, back up. If your customer comes and gets into your space. I just wonder if you feel like that's something that is being focused on, or is that part of, that's obviously the small, very granular end of it, but are those the sort
of... No. And then you hit so many things on the head with just your simple story. And I'm going to say resoundingly, no, they're not disseminating information down through the ranks. And that's what the customer is experiencing, not just at Ace Hardware, but, at a lot of these different facilities, there are guidelines that get put out by a local municipality, right? This is how, if your business is deemed essential, these are some of the things you'll have to put in place. And in a lot of cases, upper management, CEOs, CFOs, HR representatives, you can go through, whatever the size of the business is we're talking about. That person will say, okay, well, I'm going to print out this memo from the municipality and I'm going to give it to, could be the leads, right? I'm going to give it to the shift lead that's over these 12 people. And I say, well, here's a copy. Make sure everybody reads this and initials it, right? And it's going to be by the time clock. And people will just glance at it and initial it because they want to get to their next shift. People aren't experiencing leadership in the way that I define leadership. Sharing copies of memos and saying, initial this, you're responsible to know it now. That's not leadership to me. Leadership is, taking the time to walk amongst your people, maybe show them leadership by leading the way first, and then, walk with them in their shoes for a little bit. And in some cases, you got to get behind them, and give them a little shove sometimes to find success, and then get next to them again, take their temperature, see how they're doing, right? Kind of monitor and see how they're growing or how they're accepting whatever the new standard is. And then go back to what you perceive as leadership, right? Go back to your office and catch up on the things that you need to do. But leadership in today's day and age isn't the same as management. And I think that's where I think there's a disconnect. is that, especially in power sports, people that, own dealerships generally they might be great salespeople, or they might be super enthusiasts, or they might be, there's all these things where we say, oh, they're really great at this and great at that. But when it comes to leading people and growing a business, a lot of them didn't have formal training in that. And so it's not that they don't know, or it's not that they're idiots. They're not stupid. They're usually very, very smart people. They just don't have direct experience or exposure to leadership techniques and understanding how people work. And so that's why we see a lot of these gaps on sales floors and service departments and parts departments.
So that would imply to me that if somebody's maybe good at adapting, and they're good at kind of going with the flow and making the best of what they get, at this point, it might be a time to draw the line in the sand, right? And say, get out the drafting paper and board and your fancy mechanical pencil, and let's, make sure you draft out your plans and goals and what you want, versus go with the flow and get what you get and make the best of it, right? Make that shift. Might be a perfect time for that.
Well, exactly. A leader that is comfortable with change, a leader that's comfortable with communication. I think this is huge. It's not just people that are willing to make changes that are going to succeed, because making the change might alienate people. Some people hate change, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're comfortable with change, you also need to be comfortable with communication and connection, right? Like, it's one thing to communicate and throw, some information on social, or to send out a mass email or something. But it's a different matter to make sure that communication connects. And so, by leveraging relationship with customers, by leveraging relationships with, partnering type businesses in the area, in your region, you can have a lot more positive effect. And so I've been trying to work with dealers to say, hey, those of you that are okay with change, let's institute some change. Let's discuss what change looks like, for your business. And then let's discuss how we're going to communicate those changes and leverage relationships with others to have a positive effect. And then how are we going to measure that positive effect over the next 30, 60, 90 days to make sure we're going in the right direction? And it's been interesting, because some people are actually experiencing growth right now, during the quarantine. They've got more service work than they've had in the past. I talked to a shop last week. They're on a 3-week wait already to get into their shop and get something worked on. So now that brings up the second part of my training, which is like, okay, once your business increases, how are you going to increase your productivity and effectiveness to get the work done more quickly, right? Does it mean hiring more people? Does it mean modifying your techniques behind the scenes? And that's a whole different discussion. But it's been interesting to see that people that focus on communication and connection are seeing growth, whereas people that are calling up and say, there's the scarcity mindset and there's the abundance mindset, right? So if you're a general manager and you've got a 2-year-old Ninja 300 on the floor that you're paying floor plan on, you might be telling your salespeople, hey, you're going to go through this name list and you're going to call all of our previous customers until somebody buys that Ninja 300. That thing's got to go this weekend. And that's a scarcity mindset. Whereas calling existing customers and saying, hey, I know it's been a while since you've been in, we want to let you know that A, we're open. If you need anything, our service department is open, our sales department's open, our parts department's open, whatever that scenario is. But, you call them and you say, hey, we just want to make sure, are you guys okay? Do you know anyone that's sick? Is anyone in your family sick? If you're a person of faith, you might say, is it okay if I pray for you or whatever? But that relationship, right? And it's just maintaining or building that relationship. And if the community feels that connection and they know you're open, well, then you may experience a growth in sales, which is what's been happening at some of the folks that have leveraged relationships that work with me.
Well, I totally agree. And I can relate because, I'm in the house. My wife's working from home. We're both trying to help. We have, little kids in elementary school that we're trying to keep from getting too much screen time, that we're sitting there showing them how to click and do their homework on the damn computer. So it becomes an all-day proposition for 4 of us, and then keeping the kids who get too much screen time from going at it. So I can tell you, and I can relate, that what I do is find the window where I say, hey, I got everybody lunch figured out. Hey, you mind if I go for a ride real quick? Go out and on my motorcycle, and I'm gone for 45 minutes to an hour, drop of a hat, just to be out. And man, I could tell you it's never felt so good. So if your thing is going out in the RV and getting out in your friend's property, your friend has a farm, and you say, hey, can I go over in the corner of that lot right there and put my RV up for a few days or a week. And, I don't know. And the same with obviously all these other industries, and what sort of your favorite, thing to do is. I agree. And I've seen, and what I look at here in my territory where I sit, I'm in Oregon and Washington right now cannot sell a motor vehicle. I don't know about cars, if they're allowing that yet, but right now Powersports dealers there cannot, in RV, they cannot sell a unit. Service and sales are I'm hoping are busy, but I can tell you that the dealers on the other side of the river here in Oregon are really busy because they can sell. So of course there's that sort of that built up, pent up demand, and it's spilling over. So I think, a lot of that is going on right now as we speak.
There's so many ways that a dealer, let's say you are in Washington and you're not allowed to sell motorcycles right now. Okay, I totally get that. And there's rules. I read somewhere in Washington where you're only allowed to have like one person in the building, and they can only be there during the duration of a sale. This is for automotive. Right. And they can only be in there during the duration of the sale. And the customer has to prove that they're replacing a totaled vehicle or something, like it's a replacement vehicle, not just buying a vehicle.
Yes.
And so I'm like, okay, so in my line of work, I'm going, well, let's assume that the Washington dealers are out, because I'm like, okay, they're out for now, but they're not out for now. Right. And that's where I talk about leadership in a crisis. Like right now, if you're a dealer owner or a dealer general manager and you're faced with, what am I going to do with my staff? Like, I don't want to lose them, right? Because here's the worst thing that can happen to our industry. We alienate our employees, and after sending them home on furlough or laying them off, they leave, right? And we're already at a deficit for qualified people in our industry to work with our customers.
Right.
So if we lose these people, and then all of a sudden the quarantine gets lifted and the business can open and employees don't show up, if you are going into the heat of the season where it may be busy and you have no skilled staff on hand, that is probably the worst thing that can happen to our industry, this year, right? It's like, imagine we can reopen, but now there's no one to serve the client.
Yeah. I don't know if I already told you this, but today's the 28th of April. On the 7th of April, went to one of my area dealerships that I do business with and I've done business with for a long time. And they happen to be a franchised brand of the motorcycle I have in the garage, right? Well, it's been having a battery issue. The bike's less than a year old and I haven't ridden it a whole lot. So I'm thinking, it needs a new battery, but maybe they could load test it for me. Maybe at the same time, they could check the VIN and see if I've got any sort of recalls, any sort of updates, anything needed that way. And there's something else I'd like them to kind of look at. Well, I have no time expectations, right? I'd love to have the bike here all the time. So when it's sunny and I need a break, I can go take off on it. But I sent through the dealer's website, I submitted a service lead, like a Joe Schmo, right? I could probably make a phone call. Hey, it's Brian, Cycle Trader. Oh, hey, Brian, like I could do that. I did. Yeah. I just plugged in. I used my personal email address, plugged it all in, gave my VIN, gave the whole 9 yards, what I was thinking in the body of it, hit go. It bounced back in immediate, hey, thanks. We got your request. We'll be contacting you shortly. One of those sort of things. Here it is 21 days later, and I've not gotten any word from the dealer. So don't be that guy right now.
No. And so, and here's the thing where I want to make sure that I say out loud and that everybody hears it loud and clear. It is not unusual to have things go cattywampus and to feel overwhelmed or not be sure what the next step is, or to, like, if you're listening to things I say and I ramble off a bunch of stuff, I talk fast and you're just sitting there going, oh yeah, this guy's full of it. I'd like to see what you do in the real world. I'd like to see what you do in my shop. Please don't be insulted. Don't be upset. Just go, hey, you know what? If you want, hit me up on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. Let's have a discussion. And, any project, anything that is worth doing takes effort and takes work. And one of the first steps is to go, okay, where are you at now? Where do you want to be? And let's just break this thing into some pieces that are digestible. And once we do that, I find that people are a lot more, they're a lot more apt to take action, right? Because once you make it less overwhelming, then you go, okay, well, that makes sense. That's doable. I can do that. Where I've had a lot of people go, oh, dude, you don't know my customers that well. You think if I clean the shop or put LED lights in, it's going to increase business. You couldn't be further from the truth. And I'm like, well, I don't know. When's the last time you cleaned the shop and hung LED lights and test me? There's so many opportunities that'll help us drive business and productivity and efficiency up that, at the end of the day, it's all about adding value to the dealer and to the customers and improving customer perception and dealer profit, right? And that profit only comes through productivity efficiency, right? So the more that we can do to make it, a happy team, a healthy team, and people that enjoy working and being productive, the more we can do that, and obviously communication at the service counter is imperative to make sure the customers are actually coming in and agreeing to get the work done. But if we can make it a happy environment for the technicians, well, your profits are bound to go up.
If I were to say, could you give me, and you just gave me some, which is what made me think of it, to dealers in general, do these 2 or 3 things. These should be your action steps today if you're not already working on these. If you need help figuring out why these are important and so on, then reach out to Kurt. But what would you say to somebody just in a general way to say, here's 3 things you ought to be doing right now?
Brian, the question comes to me often. And the answer sounds like a non-answer. It really does. But I have to be realistic. My focal point, and remember, all these different trainers and companies all have a different focal point. Mine's communication. Mine is how to get over that gap at the service counter. And so if your service writer doesn't have any formal training in communication, even if you as the business owner, if you're the general manager and you're listening to this right now, you're going, oh, I know how to do that. You knowing how to do it, and you taking the time to work side by side with your service writer to impart those qualities, right? So then you need to bring in someone to work with your service writer and get that counter up to speed as far as communication and processing and a dispatch process, kind of overseeing the shop. That's super huge. I think, 80-90% of the lost opportunities that come through a dealership in general are through that service counter. And they could be the most likable person on the planet, but if they don't understand, the theories of dispatching work in terms of productivity and efficiency, well, then they're not going to make any money. And so that's huge. And then the non-answer part of my answer is you got to get in touch with, pick a percentage, the top 5%, the top 10% of your repeat customers, right? And then just survey them, ask them, call them from a relationship standpoint and say, what are the top 2 or 3 friction points that you see in my business from a customer standpoint, right? Because you can guess all day long, but until you actually ask, your repeat customers, hey, what were the biggest friction points for you to become a customer of our dealership? And give that customer kind of a vested interest in changes you might want to make to that buying experience. Then you can execute, right? Then you can say, okay, well, it turns out my parking lot's hard to get into. Okay, well, how can I restructure that? Can I, is it signage? Is it paint? Is it new blacktop? Is it, but try and get creative and figure out how can I meet the customer's need? And then from there, you just build on it. You try and reduce friction points one at a time. You train your staff to interact and communicate better. And if you can fix that Achilles heel at the service counter, you will see unbelievable gains through the rest of your shop. And that extends not just in service, but remember, service is the best customer to your parts department, right? So if you have a substantial increase in service, you're going to have a substantial increase in parts. And when all that begins to happen, when everything starts to fire on all cylinders, your service management team is going to have to communicate better with your sales management team to meet the sales needs as far as pre-planning units for the floor, pre-planning reconditioning of trade-ins and all that kind of stuff. And once that starts to work, once that really becomes a cohesive unit, dude, it's unbelievable what a shop can produce or the amount of profit and professionalism that a shop can exude once that.
Thanks again for listening to this lost tape of the Dealership Fix-It podcast. These guest interviews still hit hard, and we're bringing them back re-edited, sharpened up, and focused entirely on what matters, helping dealerships like yours improve, grow, and win. If you got something out of this one, hit that share button or forward it to a dealership friend who needs it. And make sure you're following the show so we can keep bringing you more content like this with convos with people shaping the powersports industry. Catch you on the next one.
Dealers, discover the power of MotoHunt's Inventory Ads program, designed to drive leads and sales for your motorcycle dealership. Our dynamic ads automatically showcase your current in-stock inventory on Google and Meta products catalogs, reaching buyers exactly when they're searching. With targeted ad campaigns, seasonal adjustments, and real-time performance tracking, you can optimize your ad spend and see impressive results. These are not your traditional SEM campaigns. These are product ads that show customers real-time motorcycles and powersports for sale and direct them directly to your landing page. Sign up today and get a marketing edge over your competition with MotoHunt.